our program, from documentaries to science. Listen and download at other times by going to BBC World Service.com. On air, online, and on smartphones, this is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station. Hello, at 10 hours GMT. Welcome to special coverage here on the BBC World Service. But on the desk at 10:06, I'm Sean. My daughter said to me that her children will never know a queen. Yeah, that only ever know a king, and I feel like that's a loss today. The UK and Commonwealth, remember, and more.
The Queen was Australia's Queen. She had a great ability with the country.
The shock, many of these.
It tells the story for probably so many people around the world that a part of our lives that was taken for granted as being common is no longer there.
And how the world is remembering Queen Elizabeth.
I am just so happy, like I've lost somebody that's been in my life for the longest time. I just like to respect her.
All that to come.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. Some salutes and church bells will sound out across the United Kingdom as the country begins a period of mourning for Queen Elizabeth. Longest serving monarch died on Thursday at the age of 96. The new British monarch, King Charles, will return to London from Balmoral Castle in Scotland later, where he's due to meet Britain's new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. From Downing Street, here's the Earl.
The cabinet has just been meeting actually for their own respect for Elizabeth II. This afternoon, MPs and members of the House of Lords will be doing the same into tomorrow when senior members of Parliament will also be able to take an oath to the new king. It has been quite a remarkable week here. When you think of some of the political turbulence we've seen over the last few years, one of the few signs of continuity has been Queen of weekly audiences. This is the first time in history that the Prime Minister and the monarch have both changed in such a short period of time.
Hundreds of mourners are gathering at royal residences across the United Kingdom in memory of Queen Elizabeth. Many people are outside Buckingham Palace in central London. There's also been a steady set of people at Windsor Castle. Among them were local residents Kelsim and Talaya.
I feel like the Queen represented Windsor. She lived here, she loved it here. And we feel her loss today. I wanted to come and mark our respect. My son, who's 6, and he goes to school here in Windsor. And he was so sad last night. He didn't want to go to school in the morning. He kept asking me, so who's going to be our Queen? And I'm like, we have a new king. So obviously children, they don't understand. But yeah, he was very sad.
Buckingham Palace has a period of royal mourning will be observed from now until 7 days after the Queen's funeral. There's been a cascade of tributes to Queen Elizabeth from around the world. President Biden described her as a steadying presence in a world of constant change. The exiled Tibetan spiritual leader, Dalai Lama, the Queen represented inspiration and a reassuring sense of continuity. The President of Malawi, Lazarus Chakwera, is one of several since his country's gained independence during her reign. Chakwera said he was grateful for the Queen's contribution to his and other African countries through transition to independence.
It is fitting that Malawi's largest referral hospital is named after her, for she contributed greatly to the smooth transition towards independence for many African states, thus ensuring that their birth was healthy and their welcome into the Commonwealth of Nations was smooth.
BBC News. In other news, the governor of the Sumy region in northeastern Ukraine says a hospital has been destroyed by Russian airstrikes. Russia continues to deny that it targets civilians. So the governor says there's been casualties as a result of this latest attack. Ukraine and Ukrainians celebrate what appears to be a major counter-offensive. Troops advancing far into Russian-occupied territory. The future of energy supplies to Europe is being discussed at an EU ministers meeting. The cost of gas and electricity has soared since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Governments across the continent are under pressure to find a way to bring prices down again. As our Eurovisional editor Paul Knott explains.
Summer is pretty much over in most of Europe, and as temperatures cool and winter approaches, people are bracing themselves for an unprecedented rise in their gas and electricity bills, and this presents a headache for those who govern them. Some countries gave up putting a cap on the amount paid to Russia for its gas. Others want to tax any excess profits made by power generators, and use the money to subsidize household bills. Achieving consensus at today's European Union meeting won't be easy, nor will implementing whatever measures are decided on.
India and China have begun withdrawing their troops from a disputed border area more than 2 years after clashes at the frontier in the western Himalayas. The Indian Foreign Ministry says the disengagement from the Gogra hot springs area will be completed on Monday. It said the breakthrough followed several meetings between senior military officers. North Korea has passed a law which it says enshrines its policy of developing nuclear weapons. President leader Kim Jong-un said its nuclear status was now irreversible, and there could be no dialogue. And those are the latest stories from BBC News.
Hello, you're listening to continuing special coverage here on the BBC World Service following the death of Queen Elizabeth. I'm Charlotte Gallagher. As world leaders pay tribute, people have been laying flowers outside the royal palaces, a while as British interferes with the world. The former British Prime Minister, Theresa May, has been sharing her own fond memories of her weekly meetings with the Queen.
I must say, it was that one meeting, the final presidential, and we knew that nothing was going to be briefed to the press or leaked afterwards. And it just tapping into her wisdom and that knowledge that she had from her great experience. She was a very acute judge of people and was able often to give those little economic input of people's achievements. There was often that twinkle in the eye and that magnificent smile that they had, and that calmed everybody's nerves and made them feel at ease. And there was always that fact of, if you think about it, what other world leader would be willing to be seen coming down on parachute from a helicopter into London 2012, or sit there watching Paddington Bear drinking tea from a teapot?
One of the things we knew about the Queen was the importance of her religious faith. She had a formal role as well as head of the Church of England. She was the supreme governor. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, met the Queen last in June.
And we felt that history was incredible, but it was history with piercingly blue eyes twinkling that extraordinary smile, and the relish of a quick, dry tongue. I came away thinking, there is someone who has no fear of death, has faith in the future, knows the rock on which she stands, and that gives her the strength, as it gives His Majesty the strength to be that sense of permanent symbol of continuity. And I was so grateful for the sacrifice that involved for her and does and will continue to involve him.
To many, the Queen was a symbol of strength, continuity and dignity in a world that changed so dramatically during her 70-year reign. Now her son Charles is king and will address the UK and Commonwealth today. Thousands were gathered outside Buckingham Palace in London. Christine left her home at 4 a.m.
She's never going to be in the balcony again. It's pretty sad. My daughter said to her that her children would never know a queen. And that they'll only ever know a king. And I feel like that's a loss.
We're joined now by our political correspondent Rob Watson. And it's hard to think of another figure that would generate the volume of tribute the Queen has, and from the varying people. Vladimir Putin, for example, sending his condolences.
Well, I think that's down to her extraordinary longevity. She is the oldest woman in the world, arguably. And because I think even people that either in this country or outside who don't think monarchy is a very modern concept, couldn't but admire her sort of steadfastness, her ever-presence. And I think there's a way in which, certainly in this country, but I think probably beyond, again, whatever your feelings about the monarchy, because of her longevity, I think there's a way in which people drew a certain amount of sort of reassurance from this woman who was always there, from a 25-year-old queen in 1952 for all the sort of turbulence, social change of the 60s, industrial unrest of the 70s. She was there. And I think in particular because I don't think the affection for her hasn't been uniform throughout the reign, but I think particularly towards the end, it's been at its highest, the sort of sense of a woman that is somehow unbelievably doesn't seem to affect a reign. I think that travels, that sort of sense of wonder that you have such a long life of service.
And also I think we've got to see more of her personality, things like Theresa May mentioning the London 2012 jumping out of a plane. Obviously she didn't jump out of a plane, it was a stunt double, and appearing with Paddington at the Jubilee. She really kind of gave a feeling of warmth to a lot of people, didn't she?
She did. I mean, I think she managed to pull off a pretty interesting trick, which is to move with the times while remaining sort of the same. Now, what I mean by that is, I mean, I don't think the Queen changed from being what she was. She's a very attractive countrywoman who understood that she was going to be Queen from the age of about 10 years old. But she moved with the times in the sense of accepting, well, maybe you do need to use social media, and maybe a bit of humour, maybe people seeing the kind of person she was a little bit more wouldn't hurt. But I think it's an incredibly powerful trick that you both show us that sort of constancy in your person, and also think, I don't know, maybe it doesn't seem to jump out of a helicopter, which would be such a bad thing.
They'll have the power to surprise people. And what are we expecting today and over the next few days?
I think over today, in particular, this is King Charles's moment. This is the first time the country and the world will see him because he will be travelling down from Balmoral. So we'll see him, we'll see his Queen Consort Camilla. He will be having his first audience with Prime Minister Truss. He will also address the nation, and there'll be a sort of service of memorial for the Queen. So this, I think, is the moment where we see him, we the world, that is, see him make that transition from Prince Charles to something completely different. I mean, not physically different, but he will be thin, and that will be a very different role.
Rob, thank you. That was Rob Watson. Crowds are gathering outside all of the royal residences, people wanting to pay tribute to the Queen. John Maguire is outside Buckingham Palace, and I asked him what the atmosphere is like there.
It's an extraordinary atmosphere, really, because people will be so familiar around the world with the frontage of Buckingham Palace, the wide front and the gates and the railings that are in front of it. And we often see the changing of the guard every day. What we have now are floral tributes and handwritten tributes, very heartfelt from short messages, one that said "Forever our Queen," to whole sides of pieces of paper where people have expressed their views, their sentiments, their feelings, and placed them down in front of the gates and the railings of Buckingham Palace. But what really strikes you is, despite the fact that there are thousands of people and the crowds have been building throughout the morning and they built again last night, it's just how quiet it is. It's quite a somber atmosphere because people are just coming, they're perhaps laying some flowers, spending a moment or two of quiet reflection, thinking about what the Queen meant to them, and talking to the crowd, talking to people from right around the world, people from Brazil, from Canada, from Australia, right across the UK, of course, is that everybody had their own personal reason for coming to Buckingham Palace this morning. They felt as if they had their own personal connection with the Queen. We've only spoken to two people that actually ever physically were anywhere near her and managed to a couple of Americans from Virginia at an occasion when the Queen visited a few years ago, but still they feel as if there's a very special link between them, and they've all come here, as I say, for their own reasons, perhaps to bow their heads for a moment's reflection, just to pay their respect to what people say. We were here for the Platinum Jubilee, it was just a few weeks ago, and the crowds were huge, and there was a great sense of joy, but people are saying the same thing to me, they're saying the same things to me about the Queen, about how much love they have for her, about how much respect for decades, for 7 decades of duty, of dedication, how she carried out her role as the Queen, of course, of the UK, but also of the Commonwealth, and such a world-renowned figure. But it's a different atmosphere today, of course. There is still that admiration, but it's changed with great sadness. And I think that's the overriding emotion that people have today, and that's certainly what people are saying to me.
John was right at Buckingham Palace, where the crowds are continuing to grow. The Queen was not just the longest serving monarch, she was the most travelled too. Her role was more than just ceremonial. She played an important diplomatic part, meeting many foreign leaders and encouraging cooperation in the Commonwealth. And around the Commonwealth, people have been paying their respects. In New Zealand, a hatchet has been performed at the Auckland War Memorial. And the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, said it was with great sadness that her country is waking up to the news. The last days of the Queen's life captures who she was in so many ways, working to the very end on behalf of the people she loved. And that is why I'm sure that you will have seen the news of this passing with both emotions of deep sadness, but also gratitude for a life that was utterly and completely devoted to the service of others. Across the Tasman Sea, Phil Mercer is in Sydney, Australia.
The Queen was Australia's Queen. She had a great affinity with this country. On a tour back in 2000, she said that she felt part of this rugged, honest and creative land. She came to Australia 16 times. The first as a very young Queen in 1954, and about 70% of the Australian population turned out to greet her with millions of people, and it really did set the stone. She became a champion for dedication and service. We've heard today from the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese saying that Queen Elizabeth II had a timeless decency and an enduring calm. And he also pointed out that the Queen had sympathy and personal kindness for Australians affected by tragedy and disaster, including floods and bushfires. We were on Sydney Harbour earlier this morning when the Sydney Harbour Bridge lowered its flags in honour of Queen Elizabeth II.
Phil Mercer. The Queen was head of 14 Commonwealth countries, including India. She visited the country 3 times and remarked on the warmth and hospitality of the Indian people. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, like many world leaders, has paid tribute to the Queen. The BBC's Arundel Mukherjee spoke to me earlier from outside the government buildings in Delhi.
We've just heard an announcement from the Indian government where they've declared one-day state mourning on the 11th of September, that is Sunday, as a mark of respect, reads the press release on the passing away of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. On that day, the national flag will be flown at half-mast throughout India on all buildings where the national flag is flown regularly, and there will be no official entertainment on that day. In fact, I am standing very close to, as I said, all the big government buildings which have the Indian flags, and most of these government buildings, ironically, are still remnants of British architecture, and that really brings me to the relationship that Queen Elizabeth shared with India, as you pointed out, visiting the country 3 times. A lot of the Indian media has been carrying this news by way of photographs of the previous visits of the Queen. So we've been seeing photos of her visit to the iconic Taj Mahal, or the Queen sitting with India's first Prime Minister. There are also photos during the round of the visitors book that she wrote in while visiting the memorial of Mahatma Gandhi, who is seen to have led India's independence movement. There's also been a tremendous recollection of how on one of her trips, people lined up on the streets, perched on rooftops, balconies to try and catch a glimpse of the Queen. And during one of her addresses here in India, she had talked about the warmth and hospitality of the Indian people as well. She first visited India in 1961, the first reigning British monarch to do so in 50 years. It was also the first visit by the Queen since India gained independence, and that's where her relationship with the country really began.
Arundel Mukherjee in Delhi. Kenya will always have an important role to play in the history of the royal family. It was there in February 1952, 25-year-old Princess Elizabeth, on a holiday and a break from royal duties with her husband Philip, found out about her father's death, which made her queen. In a letter of condolence, President Kenyatta said Queen Elizabeth had been a towering icon of selfless service to humanity. In Nairobi, these people gave their reactions to her passing.
It's sad because, Kenya was colonized by the British. So Kenya is a part and parcel of the British system. So we have a feeling about the part of the king.
They were the ones who colonialized us, and we have been having a good time today. Yeah. It's sad. The whole world, not even in Kenya alone.
The BBC's Catherine Burehanger is at the British High Commission in Nairobi.
As the news has come in about the Queen's death, the High Commissioner's residence here has opened a condolence book. They're expecting dignitaries and leaders to come here to pay their respects to the Queen. It won't be the general public that will be coming here. They're expecting leaders of the country to come here. There is a somber mood. The flag flies at half-mast. And as you heard there from those voices on the streets of Kenya, people really are taking in this news about the Queen's passing. We had a statement from the incoming President of Kenya, William Ruto, and he praised the leadership, the Queen's leadership of the Commonwealth. And to mention that it was here in Kenya that the Queen found out that she was to become Queen. It is said that the fairy tale says that she went up the treetops lodge where she was staying in the central part of the country as a princess, and then the next morning she came down as a queen. And since then we've seen this long-standing relationship that she has had with much of this continent.
And it's been a special place for her personally, hasn't it, Kenya? What have everyday Kenyans been saying about the Queen?
I think I have the newspaper here in Kenya. We have the Daily Nation and the Standard, and on the front pages are big pictures of the Queen. They're taking this moment to mark her passing. But I think it's also important to note that we are seeing some statements from Kenyans who are looking back at the Queen's legacy. Remember, she ascended the throne at a time when many African countries, Kenya included, was agitating for independence from Britain. So some people are taking the time to reflect on this painful past. The Standard newspaper has a story which talks about the best and worst times of the relationship between the Queen and Kenya. But we've also heard these statements from leaders across the continent who have been praising her service to humanity and to the Commonwealth as well.
Catherine Burehanger, you've been listening to the BBC World Service, and a reminder, this is special coverage following the death of Queen Elizabeth. Among the many tributes from leaders across the world, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has offered his condolences to King Charles for the irreparable loss of his mother. He added that King Charles should pass on his sincere condolences to both members of the royal family and the people of Great Britain. I've been speaking to the BBC's Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg.
The Kremlin leader said in his telegram of condolence that Elizabeth II rightfully enjoyed the love and respect of her subjects and held authority on the world stage. Now, it's no secret, of course, that the UK-Russian relationship right now is experiencing a lot of tension, but for now at least that has been put aside with this telegram of condolence. On my way to work this morning, I stopped outside the British Embassy in Moscow, and I could see that outside the embassy on the wall, people have been laying flowers as a mark of respect to the Queen. Not only flowers there, but there are candles too. Some people have been leaving notes. One message that I read said, Elizabeth will always be in my heart.
When I saw the message from Vladimir Putin, I thought there's not many people, in the West especially, that will get that kind of message from him at the moment with relations as they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I say, we are in a period of great tension, geopolitical tension between Russia and the West. What I find fascinating, a lot has been said about the longevity of her reign, those 70 years. Elizabeth II was queen during an extraordinary period of world history, a period of great change and geopolitical tension. And throughout, she was, if you like, a constant presence. I find it incredible to think when her father, King Thomas VI, died in 1952 and she became queen, the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin was still in power. And the Cold War was still in its infancy. The Berlin Wall hadn't even been built then. And for more than 3 decades, she was queen during a time of great tension between the East and West. But when change eventually came, Queen Elizabeth perfected that. So when Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet leader, visited the UK in 1989, she hosted him, and that was a sign that the Cold War was coming to an end. And when she visited Moscow in 1994, she became the first British monarch to go to Russia since the communist revolution of 1917. That was a sign, a positive sign, for UK-Russian relations. And she hosted Vladimir Putin in 2003. And that gave hope that the relationship between Moscow and London would be strong. It sadly didn't work out.
That was Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. And some breaking news. King Charles III has left Balmoral. He's on his way to London, where he'll meet the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and address the nation. For many in Britain, the Queen was always there. Everything the country endured and celebrated was with her. Great technological change, including the advent of television even, with the 1957 Christmas broadcast. Today is another landmark, because television has made it possible for many of you to see me in your homes on Christmas Day. And throughout national struggles, she was there to try and unify the country. Here she is giving a message during the unprecedented strains of the COVID pandemic.
While we have faced challenges before, this one is different. This time we join with all nations across the globe in a common endeavor, using the great advances of science and our instinctive compassion to heal. We will succeed, and that success will belong to every one of us. We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
After 70 years on the throne, Queen Elizabeth was the longest reigning British monarch of all time. She will be succeeded by her eldest son, King Charles III. In the past few minutes, he's left Balmoral to report for London. Our royal correspondent, Sean Coughlin, told us what we can expect from the new monarch in the next few days.
To show himself to the people on television, he'll have a recorded address, and also he'll have to meet the new Prime Minister. Both Liz Truss is new in her job, and he's new in his job. The two of them will meet today. So I think he'll have to present himself to the people, even though he also has the personal loss at this time of losing his mother. So for someone who's just lost his mother, he faces some very tough public duties in the hours and days ahead.
And also to fill her shoes. I mean, you've seen the tributes from around the world. I don't think there's a single world leader who hasn't paid tribute. He now has to take on that mantle and ensure the continuity of the royal family.
Well, that's right. And it's not maybe big shoes. They're very big shoes to fill. And I think they'll be fully aware of that. I mean, he's been heir to the throne for almost all his life. For 70 years, he's been heir to the throne. And he's known this is coming, and he's prepared for it. And he's often spoken about how he will have to change the role that's ahead of him. I think it's a big thing, and I think it'll be a big personal pressure. Even as we speak, he'll be preparing his speech for tonight, finding the right tone. What message do you give? How do you convey that sense of continuity and stability? But also make sure that his reign also has its own message and its own character. So he's got a big day ahead of him.
Sean Coughlin, our royal correspondent. You've been listening to special coverage on the BBC World Service following the death of Queen Elizabeth. Britain is beginning a period of mourning for the late Queen. This is the BBC World Service.
Science, its observation and discovery.
These are supermassive black hole mergers. Black holes that are anywhere from 100 million to 1 billion times the mass of the sun. The most violent event in the universe.
It explains the world around us and what happens to us.
The way to think about things from a scientific perspective is to think about what the question is. Are children and teenagers more prone to boredom than adults? Yes. We do know that there is kind of a peak developmental time where people experience boredom more so than other life stages.
It can blow your curious mind.
If the world wants to stabilise global warming to 2 degrees by the end of the century, well, here's one new idea. Trains on special railway wagons built to suck carbon dioxide out of the air.
Science on the BBC World Service.
She didn't expect to be Queen. Yet from 1952, Queen Elizabeth II served as head of state amid extraordinary political and social transformations. And not just in Britain, but also across the Commonwealth. I'm Jill McGivern. I'll be assessing the long reign of Britain's Queen Elizabeth II and what it reveals about the United Kingdom, its people, and the Commonwealth of Nations. That's coming up after the news here on the BBC World Service.
BBC News, where Jerry speaks. Gun salutes and church bells will sound out across the United Kingdom as the country begins a period of mourning for Queen Elizabeth. Britain's longest-serving monarch died on Thursday at the age of 96. The new British monarch, King Charles, is returning to London from Balmoral Castle in Scotland while the Queen dies. To the King will give his first televised address at head of state. Hundreds of mourners are gathering at royal residences across the United Kingdom in memory of Queen Elizabeth. Many people are outside Buckingham Palace in central London. The public has been asked to roll floral tributes at dedicated sites on nearby schools. There's been a cascade of global tributes to Queen Elizabeth from across the political spectrum. President Biden described her as a steadying presence in a world of constant change. President Putin of Russia called her death a difficult and irreparable loss. The exiled Tibetan spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, said the Queen represented inspiration and a reassuring sense of continuity. Sporting and music events around Britain have been cancelled or postponed following the death of the Queen. Last night at the Proms, the world's largest classical music festival, will not be. In other news, the governor of the Seoul region of Ukraine says a hospital has been destroyed by a Russian airstrike. Russia continues to deny that it targeted civilians. The governor said there have been casualties. As Ukrainians celebrate what appears to be a major counter-offensive with its troops advancing far into Russian-occupied territory. And the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has described the floods in Pakistan as a climate catastrophe. Stating its right to support Pakistan's response to the disaster. ABC News.
I'm Jill McGivern, and in this special programme here on the BBC World Service, I'll be considering the life and reign of Queen Elizabeth II. She was Britain's head of state across an extraordinary period of social and political change. Elizabeth wasn't born to be Queen. It was only when her uncle, King Edward VIII, abdicated in 1936, when she was 10, that her father became monarch as George VI. The heir to the throne's teenage years were overshadowed by the Second World War. It made her part of the generation which had special reasons to value patriotism, unity, and common endeavour. She much later recalled that when Allied victory was declared in 1945, she and her sister Margaret slipped away from Buckingham Palace to mingle with the exultant crowds outside.
I remember it terrified in Western. We cheered the King and Queen on the balcony and then walked miles through the street. I remember lines of unnamed people walking arms and walking down Whitehall. All of us just kept along at a tide of happiness and relief. After crossing Green Park, we stood outside and shouted, "We want the King!" And we were successful in seeing my parents on the balcony, having treated nicely as we sent a message into the house saying we were waiting outside. I think it was one of the most memorable nights of my life.
her, it was a rare moment of normality. It would almost never be repeated. During the war, something else happened which was to shake Elizabeth's life. She fell in love. She first met her cousin, Philip, Prince of Grace, 10 years earlier, and their engagement was announced in July 1947, with the wedding a few months later.
As the Irish coach comes abreast of the crowd, they can see the bride in there. There's something quite personal which seems to come alive to them. This is our princess. And this great affectionate crowd is watching her go on her way to marry the man she loves.
For as much as Philip and Elizabeth Alexandra men both consented together in a holy wedlock, and have witnessed the same before God and this covenant, I pronounce that they be man and wife together.
Earlier that year, Princess Elizabeth broadcast a solemn commitment to Britain and the new Commonwealth that was emerging from the ruins of pre-war empire.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be land or soul, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
But the death of her father, King George VI, changed the course of her life forever. In a BBC television programme many years later, she reflected on the significance of that moment.
In a way, I didn't have an apprenticeship. My father died much too young, and so it was all a very sudden kind of taking on and making the best job you can. It's a question of maturing and into something that one got used to doing. And accepting the fact that here you are, and it's your fate. Because I think continuity is very important. It is a job for life.
A job for life. Not one, in other words, which would ever allow her to abdicate, as her uncle had done. Her coronation was held the following year in Westminster Abbey.
Madam, is your Majesty willing to take the oath? Will you solemnly promise and swear to govern the people of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Union of South Africa, Pakistan, and Ceylon, and of your possession, the other territories to any of them belonging or pertaining, according to their respective laws and customs.
I solemnly promise so to do.
Queen Elizabeth's coronation was the biggest event yet seen on the new television service in Britain. Some 20 million people watched it, out of a British population then of 50 million, often crowding around a black and white set specially acquired for the occasion by friends or neighbours. As the Queen herself later explained, this was no ordinary role.
Most people have a job and then they go home. And in this existence, the job and the life go on together because you can't really divide it up. The boxes and communications just keep on coming, and of course, on other communications, they come even quicker.
They kept on coming partly because Queen Elizabeth had to be briefed on more than just events in Britain. At her accession in 1952, the Commonwealth consisted of only 8 countries. But with the growing pressure for independence among many nations that were then British colonies, it eventually grew to more than 50 members. Together they represented almost a third of the world's total population. And in later years, countries like Rwanda and Mozambique, which didn't have historic ties to London, also became members. This was the opening of the Commonwealth Summit in Nigeria with President Obasanjo in 2003.
Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, yes,
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Her Majesty the Queen and head of the country.
The Commonwealth is one of the great partnerships of the world, where rich and poor, large and small, work together for the common good. This partnership remains crucial, not just for peace and prosperity within the Commonwealth, but in the wider world.
The Queen's role as head of the Commonwealth of Nations was one of the pillars of her reign. When Nelson Mandela visited London as the president of a politically multiracial South Africa to mark the end of the racial discrimination known as apartheid, under that country's international isolation, it was obvious that it was one of the Queen's happiest moments.
Mr. President, I am delighted to welcome you to Buckingham Palace on this, the first state visit to Britain by a President of South Africa. And what a pleasure it gave to all of us in the Commonwealth when you rejoined in 1994. South Africa has an invaluable role to play in furthering our Commonwealth ideals. I raise my glass to your health and to the prosperity and happiness of all the people of South Africa.
As well as being Britain's head of state and head of the Commonwealth, the Queen was, like her predecessors as monarch dating back over 400 years, the supreme governor of the Church of England. This meant she was head of a Christian denomination that was part of the worldwide Anglican Communion, with its large membership across Africa and parts of Asia.
It is rightly acknowledged that people of faith have no monopoly of virtue, and that the well-being and prosperity of the nation depends on the contribution of individuals and groups of all faiths and of none. Yet, as the recent visit of His Holiness the Pope reminded us, churches and the other great faith traditions retain the potential to inspire great enthusiasm, loyalty, and a concern for the common good.
One of the most marked developments in Britain during the Queen's reign was the growth in the number of people who practiced faiths other than Christianity, such as Hinduism. Her visits to temples and shrines with connections to South Asia have special significance.
It's a recognition of not only the Hindu faith, but also the Tamil people. I think it will make all the community to bond with each other, to understand about religion.
The Queen also presided over a social revolution. In the 1960s, bands like the Beatles challenged the old order with its rigid hierarchies and formal traditions, and that included the monarchy. If it wanted to fade into irrelevance, it needed to get with it. Once the monarchy decided that it had to be more up-to-date, Queen Elizabeth agreed to take part in a groundbreaking TV documentary called Royal Family. It showed something never witnessed by the public before, the Queen leading an informal life.
They're changing guard at Buckingham Palace. All those back windows visitors have stared at week after week, year after year, know perfectly well they could never see what goes on behind. Now they can. They can look at the inner workings of the busiest royal palace in the world.
By the 1970s, helped by the Royal Family program, Queen Elizabeth was a well-known and confident figure on the world stage. But by the time the Queen celebrated her Silver Jubilee in 1977, Britain was beset by persistent economic failings and a much diminished international status. In St. Paul's Cathedral that summer, almost 3,000 guests gathered for a special service.
If this is not exactly a period of restful for us, it is certainly one of refreshment and of happiness and satisfaction.
More than 1 million people lined the streets to cheer the Queen as she took part in a procession through London. As large crowds cheered the Queen in one part of London, members of the punk band the Sex Pistols were being arrested in another. For those who were angry with the political establishment at a time of sharply rising unemployment, the Queen symbolised what was wrong with the country. It was clear from polls, though, that the great majority of the British public supported the monarchy, even when, later in the reign, a Republican became leader of Britain's Labour Party. Queen Elizabeth's actual constitutional powers were always limited. What she really had was influence, which inevitably all her time on the throne. Her reign had started with Winston Churchill. Tony Blair was her 10th Prime Minister. While in office, he explained why he found her experience so valuable.
You just understand this person has lived through this chapter of our history and seen all these changing times, and the accumulated amount of experience and knowledge is immense and actually very valuable for whoever who's Prime Minister. She will assess situations and difficulties and can describe them, but without ever, and I have to say this is a remarkable thing all the years now to these audiences, without ever giving any clue as to some political preference or anything like that. I mean, it's very remarkable to see.
I have had quite a lot of women, starting with the Winston, and some stayed longer than others. They unburden themselves, or they tell me what's going on, or they've got any problems. Sometimes one can help in that way too. So they know that one can be impartial, so to speak. I think it's rather nice to feel that one is sort of a sponge. And everybody can come and tell one things. And some things stay there, and some things go out to other ears, and some things never come out at all. If one just knows about it. And occasionally, be able to put one's point of view, which they hadn't seen it from that angle.
But if the Queen seemed to represent continuity, the increasing spotlight on her children, coupled with their marital problems, plunged the royal family into one of its deepest crises of the modern era. In 1992, the Queen had to endure a series of high-profile dramas, all played out in gleeful detail in the press. First, her second son, Andrew, the Duke of York, separated from his wife, Sarah Ferguson. A month later, her daughter, Princess Anne, divorced her husband, Captain Mark Phillips. Then the media focused on the crumbling marriage of the heir to the throne, Charles, the Prince of Wales, and his wife, Princess Diana. To cap it all, Queen Elizabeth's favourite residence, Windsor Castle, was ravaged by fire. It had been a rocky year.
1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. Where, as one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
The idea of the monarchy as a focus of national unity has failed. And then...
This is BBC Radio News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. Princess, who was 36, died late last night in a car crash in Central Pass.
Princess Diana, the first wife of Prince Charles, had been a new style of royal. Glamorous, warm, emotionally expressive, and hugely popular. Images abounded of her supporting charitable causes, from the then controversial fight against AIDS to the international campaign to ban landmines. But Diana's life had also long been troubled, with much of it ruthlessly documented in the press. Her death in 1997 unleashed a tide of public grief and a blast of criticism for the royal family, from which many thought she'd been cruelly excluded. Crowds laid bouquets in front of the royal palaces, and Elton John's tribute to the princess, which the pop star performed at her funeral, again topped the charts. When the news broke of Diana's death, the Queen was on holiday at her Scottish residence, Balmoral Castle. Despite the outpouring of public feeling, she didn't fly straight back to London. It was argued that the young princes, Diana's sons, should be able to grieve privately with their father and grandparents while away from the media. But many saw this as a serious misjudgment of the public mood. In an atmosphere of some crisis, the Queen returned to Buckingham Palace just before Diana's funeral and sought to repair the damage by making an unprecedented live broadcast to the nation. In it, she did pay a warm, personal tribute to Diana.
I hope that tomorrow we can all, wherever we are, join in expressing our grief for Diana's loss and gratitude for her all-too-short life. It is a chance to show to the whole world the British nation united in grief and respect. May those who died rest in peace, and may we, each and every one of us, thank God for someone who made many, many people happy.
It was a low point. With the monarchy on the defensive, this might have seen the time for its critics in Britain and across the world to seize the moment. In Australia, where calls for the country to become a republic have intensified, a referendum was held in 1999 on whether to replace Queen Elizabeth with a president as head of state, but it failed by a 55% to 45% majority. A corner seems to have been turned. Certainly by the Queen's Golden Jubilee in 2002, the public mood had lifted. This was confirmed in the reaction to the death first of her sister, Princess Margaret, and then 6 weeks later of the Queen Mother. There was far greater openness and emotional expression than had been seen before, reflected in the Queen's special message of thanks on the eve of her mother's funeral.
Ever since my beloved mother died over a week ago, I have been deeply moved by the outpouring of affection which has accompanied her death. My family and I always knew what she meant to the people of this country, and the special place she occupied in the hearts of so many, here, in the Commonwealth, and in other parts of the world. But the extent of the tribute that huge numbers of you have paid my mother in the last few days has been overwhelming. I have drawn great comfort from so many individual acts of kindness and respect.
In the years that followed, the public mood did shift. In April 2005, Prince Charles, her eldest son, married Camilla Parker Bowles, the woman identified as his long-term mistress. As they settled into a life of royal engagements and tours together, the British public eventually accepted her. The sons of Prince Charles and Diana gave the monarchy new appeal too as they grew into adulthood. This was confirmed when Prince William, their firstborn, married his long-standing girlfriend, Catherine Middleton, in 2011, and the Queen's first great-grandson, Prince George, was born 2 years later, then Princess Charlotte in 2015, and Prince Louis in 2018. By 2012, she felt perfectly comfortable joining in the fun inspired by the London Olympics. Her role in the opening ceremony highlighted the Queen's sense of humour.
Good evening, Mr. Bond.
Good evening, Your Majesty.
The James Bond stunt at London 2012 capped a hugely successful Diamond Jubilee year for the Queen. The next decade started with an enormous challenge for Britain and the world, the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. Here, the Queen, who had to stay above the fray in politics, such as the United Kingdom's vote to leave the European Union in 2016, was able to speak to the nation freely and comfort her subjects.
While we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
Those reassuring words, "We will meet again," were a quote from a song by Dame Vera Lynn that had been very popular during the Second World War. Their use by the Queen was a masterful reminder that while bad times happen, they also end. The Queen herself survived a bout of COVID-19, but had to contend with other challenges during the pandemic years. Her grandson, Prince Harry, had married the American actress Meghan Markle, and they'd become the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, who proved popular with young people. But then came the news that the Sussexes wanted to stop being so-called working royals. They moved first to Canada and the United States, where they gave a television interview to Oprah Winfrey to explain what prompted their departure. The Duchess of Sussex, whose mother is African-American, hinted at racism in the royal family at a time when she was expecting their son, Archie Mountbatten Windsor.
In those months when I was pregnant, we had in tandem the conversation of he won't be given security, not going to be given a title, and also concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
Another television interview 2 years previously had also been damaging. Prince Andrew spoke on the BBC's Newsnight programme about his relationship with a convicted sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein, who had taken his own life in an American prison. The broadcast was seen as a PR disaster. 3 days later, and with his mother's explicit approval, Prince Andrew announced that he would no longer perform royal duties. But the greatest sadness for the Queen during these years was the loss of her husband and consort, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, who died aged 99 in April 2021. They had been married for 73 years.
We are here today in St. George's Chapel to commit into the hands of God the soul of his servant Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. With grateful hearts, we remember the many ways in which his long life has been a blessing to us. We have been inspired by his unwavering loyalty to our Queen, by his service to the nation and the Commonwealth, by his courage, fortitude and faith.
Philip died just 2 months short of his 100th birthday. The following year, the Queen reached a different milestone.
Celebrations and commemorations are taking place up and down the country with the beginning of 4 days of events to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee.
Her Majesty has completed 70 years as sovereign, becoming the longest ever reigning British monarch. The Platinum Jubilee was also celebrated across the world. Icons were lit in the 54 countries that make up the Commonwealth, and congratulations poured in from many heads of state. And she now delighted many with a televised sketch. The fictional character, Paddington Bear, had been invited for tea, but appeared to drink it all by himself, leaving none for Her Majesty.
Perhaps you would like a marmalade sandwich. I always eat one for emergencies.
So do I. I keep mine in here.
A sandwich kept in Her Majesty's handbag. Paddington Bear then expressed a gratitude felt by many.
Happy Jubilee, ma'am. And thank you for everything.
That's very kind.
Despite the tribulations of her reign for Britain and the Commonwealth, and despite the questioning of monarchy in a celebrity-focused age, she remained resolute, becoming one of the world's longest reigning monarchs, and without question, its best known. But it wasn't just longevity. She was, to the end, steadfast, dedicated, and loyal. Virtues which helped secure the survival of the British monarchy, as it makes the transition to yet another generation.
This is the BBC World Service, bringing you daily news about money and work.
The people who want to come to Japan are people who want to do business, and we're shutting these fans out. Very difficult to find people who want to work
industry.
Shipping in this case is sided with the international conservation groups.
The Russian currency is declining, so doing business in Russia becomes very hard actually.
Business Daily on the BBC World Service. This is the BBC World Service, and on our website you can explore more of our programmes, from documentaries to science. Listen and download at any time by going to bbcworldservice.com. On air, online and on smartphone, this is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to a news special from the BBC World Service marking the death of Queen Elizabeth II. I'm Paul Henley. Today, as the UK enters an official period of mourning as head of state, we hear many individual recollections of what the Queen meant from members of the public gathering outside royal residences today.
This is the sad day for us all today. Not well known, this one Queen. Things are back that we've always looked up to.
The former heads of state and religious leaders and representatives of Commonwealth countries who say they will feel her loss keenly.
As the head of Commonwealth, Her Majesty was able to transform the Commonwealth into a robust family of 3 nations.
We speak to our correspondents at Balmoral and at Buckingham Palace, and we look forward to the next era of British rule as King Charles III prepares to make his first official address to the nation following his mother's death. After the news.
The BBC Spedjones bells are ringing out at churches across the United Kingdom to honour Queen Elizabeth. The country begins a period of mourning to mark the end of her 70-year reign. Parliament is holding a special session to pay tribute to the country's longest-serving monarch, who died on Thursday at the age of 96. King Charles III is now heading for London after leaving Balmoral Castle in Scotland. Political correspondent Rob Watson reports.
Britain and the world are adjusting to life without Queen Elizabeth. Tributes to her life and service continue to pour in, and well-wishers have been gathering at royal palaces. The day will also bring the first chance to see and hear from the new king, King Charles III. He will be back in London for his first meeting with Prime Minister Liz Truss, and will later make a short address to the nation. Meanwhile, politicians and people alike will continue to both mourn and reflect on what this momentous change means for the nation.
Many upcoming sporting and musical events across Britain have been called off following the death of the Queen. The next round of fixtures in the Premier League and the English Football League have been postponed. Our business correspondent Theo Ricketts has more detail.
As preparations are made for the late Queen to lie in state in Westminster Hall, events across the country have already been postponed or cancelled as a mark of respect. They include horse racing meetings, a major golfing tournament, and an international cricket match. Trade unions have pulled off planned industrial action, meaning that a postal strike and a series of planned stoppages on rail networks later this month will not go ahead.
There's been a cascade of global tributes to Queen Elizabeth from across the political spectrum. President Biden described her as a steadying presence in a world of constant change. Chinese President Xi Jinping called her death a great loss. President Putin has also sent his condolences. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg says the Queen was a popular figure in the country.
It's no secret, of course, that UK-Russian relations are strained at the moment, but that has been put aside at least for today. You mentioned the telegram of condolences sent by President Putin to King Charles. Also, all words today in the Russian papers. For example, it's the front page news of this paper today, and the paper says the Queen's death is the end of an epoch, not only for the British people, but the whole world.
Flags are flying at half-mast in many of the 14 other countries where Queen Elizabeth was head of state, including Canada, Australia, New Zealand and Jamaica. The Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea said the monarch would be remembered fondly as Mama Queen. You're listening to World News from the BBC. In other news, the governor of the Seoul region in northeastern Ukraine says a hospital has been destroyed by a Russian airstrike. Russia continues to deny that it targets civilians. The the governor said there have been casualties as a result of this latest attack. It came as Ukrainians celebrate what appears to be a major counter-offensive, with its troops advancing far into Russian-occupied territory. The future of energy supplies to Europe has been discussed at an EU ministers' meeting. The cost of gas and electricity has soared since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Governments across the continent are under pressure to find a way to bring prices down. Estonian Energy Minister Irina Sikkut said the EU must stand firm to meet the challenge.
If anyone had any doubt what the situation is, that Russia has said, if you want our gas, take down the sanctions. It is blackmail. It's war that is waged outside of Ukraine. We cannot back down. We have to be united. We have to have political will to help Ukraine win.
The Ethiopian government has dismissed a new report which has called for the UN Security Council to take action to prevent an escalation in the country's civil war and to protect civilians. Reports by the UN Appointed Commission of Human Rights Experts said Eritrea was also involved in the recent resumption of fighting. Police in Chad have fired tear gas to disperse a large crowd of protesters, accompanying the main opposition leader who was summoned to court. Next Masra, the head of the Transformers Party, has been strongly critical of the military government led by General Muhammad Idris Deby. Mr. Masra said he did not know why he'd been called to court by a chance prosecutor. BBC.
Hello and welcome to a special programme from the BBC World Service coming to you live from London. My name's Paul Henley. Today marks the beginning of an official period of mourning in the United Kingdom for Queen Elizabeth. Britain's longest serving monarch died on Thursday at the age of 96. The new British monarch, King Charles, will give his first televised address as head of state later today. Hundreds of mourners have been gathering at royal residences across the country. As the news broke of the Queen's death, a crowd outside Buckingham Palace in London sang an impromptu God Save the Queen. And these were mourners outside Windsor Castle to the west of London.
It's just a sad day for the world today, and Elizabeth known just one Queen. She's the person we've always looked up to. I know I've never been to a rally, so I don't know why I've been so affected by it. It's literally found out 2 minutes ago before it happened. I didn't think I would be, but I really am, and I realised just how important she was, you know, for the stability. So I think Charles on her footsteps. That's why I believe he did a good job.
In the last few moments, bells have begun to peal across the country. Traditionally, the Queen likes to spend much of the summer and early autumn on the royal estate at Balmoral in Deeside in the Scottish Highlands. And it was there that she died, within days of accepting the resignation of a Prime Minister and welcoming in a new one. Balmoral is where the Queen spent some of her happiest times, often with her family, and somewhere she saw as a place of peace and retreat. Let's go now live to Balmoral and speak to the BBC's James Shaw. What is the scene there, James?
Well, I've been here since before dawn on this first day after the death of Queen Elizabeth and the new king, of course, being Charles III from yesterday when the Queen died. And at the start of the day, small numbers of people were coming up to the gates of Balmoral Castle and leaving messages and leaving flowers. And over the course of the day, over the course of the morning, those numbers have increased so that now the local council here in Aberdeenshire has laid on buses so that people can be brought from the nearby towns of Braemar and Ballater in large numbers. And I've seen them coming off the buses, carrying their cargoes of flowers and heading off towards the gates.
so that those banks of flowers are now getting bigger and bigger, and that will continue over the course of the day. And the kind of messages that they're leaving: thank you for your service, Mom, rest in peace. A picture by a little girl, Pippa Gray, aged 10. Thank you, Queen Elizabeth II, for your service to our nation. A message from all the pupils of a primary school in Western Berkshire, quite a distance from here. And then finally, thank you for your dedication, service and reign. You have been a source of inspiration and a calming figure throughout my life. And I suppose what it brings home is that for a lot of people in the United Kingdom, the Queen is an incredibly significant figure, someone that they have known their whole lives. And it is difficult for people to imagine life without Queen Elizabeth, with a new monarch. And that, I think, is what a lot of people in the UK are coming to terms with, and that will continue, and that will resonate across this country for certainly days to come.
Tell us a bit more about how the Queen regarded Balmoral.
Well, it was her holiday home. It has been a holiday home of the royal family since the 1850s, when Queen Victoria and Prince Albert bought a castle from the local family, the Parkinsons. And since then, it's traditionally been the summer home of the royal family. But I don't think it was necessarily just a sense of tradition that brought Queen Elizabeth to Balmoral. It is an integral part of her life. It's a vital part of her life, or it was. She spent all her summers, nearly all her summers here, surrounded by her family. And it's a stunning location in the northwest of Scotland, surrounded by mountains, by lochs, rivers, forests, wildlife. There were deer roaming around those many acres, many hectares of this huge estate. And the family would have picnics and barbecues by the side of lochs. And a lot of those family moments, I'm sure, are memories of Queen Elizabeth that our close family will treasure. Those memories are connected with this place, and it is the place where essentially she decided she wanted to be when she became unwell, and then of course ultimately she died yesterday in this place that she loved so much.
Thank you very much, James Shaw at Balmoral. Long live the King was the last thing the new British Prime Minister Liz Truss said in a brief speech yesterday, reacting to the death of Her Majesty the Queen. King Charles III, as he'll be known, was in Balmoral when his mother died. Today he has to travel to London in time to deliver his first televised address to the nation as King. That'll happen at 6 o'clock this evening, UK time. Here now from the BBC's royal correspondent Johnny Diamond, who joins us from outside Buckingham Palace. Johnny, what is the atmosphere like there?
Somber, I think you could say, Paul. Busy, thick streams of people making their way up the great ceremonial road, Constitutional Hill that leads up to the palace, some of them clutching flowers, many of them taking photographs. It's quiet here. The last time I was here was about 2 months ago for the Jubilee, and it was a very different scene. A scene of great joy there, and a very, very different time now. People milling about, people heading towards the gate to press their flowers against the great gold-topped gates in front of the palace. But thousands of people here, some to see the scene, no doubt about that, but many to pay their respects, to be here at this time. Some will stay, many will move on, but they will be replaced by the thousands who are coming from all the great parks around ceremonial London to pay their respects. Just, half an hour ago, the King's Troop, Royal Horse Artillery, made their way on their horses, dragging their guns behind them, the wheels rumbling on the wet roads as they made their way towards Hyde Park, one of the great parks where in about 45 minutes the guns will ring out in a royal salute, one of a set of salutes that will come from London, Belfast, Cardiff, Edinburgh and other salute stations across the country and around the world.
Let's take a moment to talk about the new king, if we can now, Johnny. The oldest king to come to the throne, is that right?
Yes, the oldest king to come to the throne, and a job, if you will, that he has obviously spent many decades thinking about. He has been a fixture as Prince of Wales for a very long time, and has had times of controversy, not just because of his personal life, but also because of strongly held views on various different topics that he has been forthright about. That time of talking about his own opinions and pressing his own campaigns came to an end the moment that he became king. He made very clear in an interview a few years ago that once he became sovereign, he would no longer take part in any of that kind of campaigning or pressuring in any shape or form. And now on his shoulders lies the crown, the position of head of state and head of nation. And we can see him now making his way in Aberdeen Airport towards one of the RAF aircraft that will bring him to London. He's being greeted by dignitaries just before he makes his way up the steps of a small aircraft that will make the short flight from Aberdeen to London, and then he'll make his way here to Buckingham Palace.
And his wife, Camilla, how will she be known? Do we know that already?
Formally as the Queen Consort, and that means that she is differentiated from the Queen who has passed. I suspect fairly quickly, in fact, that will become informally known as Queen Camilla. We have to wait to see what that will be, but that itself was a significant step. There has been discussion about what her title would be, even rather what her role would be. We'll wait to see how she develops as Queen Consort and what role she takes. But it has to be said, the main focus, inevitably, will be on the sovereign himself, will be on King Charles. As I think you mentioned earlier, and as the Speaker of the House of Commons has confirmed in the last few minutes, we'll hear from King Charles at 6 o'clock UK time. That's in about 5.5 hours or so, when an address that he will record will be played out to the nation just as a service of reflection and thanksgiving starts in St Paul's Cathedral in central London.
Many thanks, Johnny Diamond, outside Buckingham Palace, live. Now, in 2011, the Queen became the first British monarch to set foot in the Republic of Ireland since it gained independence. The visit was epitomised by her address to a state banquet in Dublin, when she began by speaking in Gaelic. Commentators at the time said it was a formative moment in history. Bertie Ahern served as Taoiseach, that's the Irish Prime Minister, from 1997 to 2008, and has many recollections of the Queen. He joins us now. Mr. Ahern, welcome to the programme. Take us back, if you would, first to 2011, the state visit which you helped plan.
Yeah, I mean, that was an enormously important occasion. You know, Her Majesty had been all over the world. She'd been everywhere so many times, but she'd never been to the Republic of Ireland. And, you know, it took us a long time to try to get that visit together, where it was many years and different things were happening in the north that delayed it. But the reality was that it was very important to her. It was important to, I think, to everybody in the country. And it proved to be a huge success. And I think it changed and attitudes. I think a lot of people mellowed about it. People were really delighted she was there, and it was a tremendous occasion, and both the state functions, but also the public engagements, the fact that she went around in Cork into the markets area, you know, proved us to be one of those really important occasions for the country.
There were a couple of key moments, weren't there, when she revealed that she was perfectly comfortable, for instance, about paying homage to those who died in the 1916 uprising.
Yeah, I think that was probably, in my view, the key issue. Obviously, Dublin Castle, they were speaking in Irish, in our national language was very important. But we had hoped for a long time that we would be able to have a visit where we could, do the normal thing that head of state did. So in the planning, obviously, the Queen was going to go to the President's residence, plant a tree, which is what they do. But then, coming to the Garda Remembrance, which is the commemoration centre of the men and women of 1916, this was big, and she had no difficulty agreeing to that. She personally very quickly agreed to that, and it really, made that visit. And
people saw.
Have we lost you, Bertie Ahern? I think the line has gone down. It's still there. We're just trying to see if you can hear me at the moment. Bertie Ahern, former Irish Taoiseach. Yeah, you're back with us. Maybe you could. We kind of lost your thread. You were cut off in the middle of an answer. Can you tell me, generally, your recollections, your memories of Her Majesty?
Yeah, well, I think for me, I mean, all my life, you know, she has been there. In spite of her difficult history in the early years, I think there was a great appreciation always of the fact that she was, you know, head of state, that she was head of the Commonwealth, and that she was out there on every big occasion. And in Ireland, people respected that. I mean, they saw the huge service that she'd given and what she stood for. And I think she always tried to be helpful to us, and I had the opportunity to meet her many times. After the Good Friday Agreement, I was with her in Buckingham Palace. She took a great interest, and like everything she was involved with, she was well briefed. She knew the ins and outs, she knew the individuals, she knew some of the complexities, and she was always helpful, and she knew that her state visit to Ireland was kind of an essential part of trying to bring that era of reconciliation and trust and confidence. And I think she was really, really happy as we were that did happen.
Many thanks for coming on the programme. That's Bertie Ahern, former Irish Prime Minister, in fact from 1997 to 2008. Joining me in the studio for the duration of this programme is Linda Yu. She is chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society. She's a broadcaster, economist and author. Just underline for us, Linda, would you, the importance of the Queen's role as head of the Commonwealth first?
Well, there's nobody who's done more for the Commonwealth than the Queen. She is the head of the Commonwealth, and she has been for 70 years. So this is the year of her Platinum Jubilee, and it also marks this milestone as leaders a network of countries that includes about 2.5 billion people. So it's about a third of the world's population. And what, in her time, it's grown from 9 countries to 56 countries. And I think what she has brought, which I feel is rather special, looking at it as the chair of the charity, is that she always stressed the importance of people and linking together with people in common cause. So the charitable sector in the Commonwealth is known as the third pillar. It's not the best description, but what it shows is it's different from grouping, say, like the G20, where it's all about government. And that's really the Queen's contribution. When she said this is the modern Commonwealth, obviously we need to elevate values like service, like peace, like development, and then instilling that by supporting 257 Commonwealth charities. So in addition to ours, that's about a third of all the charities that she's the head of. I think it's that kind of leading by example, that kind of stress. I think that's what she's essentially synonymous in many ways with the Commonwealth.
So the Queen meant an awful lot to the Commonwealth. Do we know what the Commonwealth meant to the Queen?
I can only say from I've had the pleasure and the privilege of meeting her on several occasions, and her interest in the Commonwealth and the support that she gives is really evident. And I think that is a reflection of the importance that she places on the Commonwealth. So I remember at Buckingham Palace, there was a ceremony to recognize the Queenstown leaders. So they are now Associate Fellows of the Royal Commonwealth Society. So there were 54 countries at the time. That's 54 young people, each selected from their country because of their contribution to their community. And the Queen stood there, spoke to each of them as they walked up to the dais, and spent time, just recognizing their contribution. She did that 54 times. And I think you don't do that unless you are, it really does mean a great deal, clearly to the recipients of this recognition. But I think it just reflects how important the Commonwealth and the young people of the Commonwealth were to the Queen.
We'll talk a bit later on in the programme about talk of some of the countries in the Commonwealth becoming republics, having been ongoing for some time, and ask how that's going to work now that Charles is king. But first, the Queen's religious faith was central to her life.
but it was more than personalised with every aspect of her life. There was a formal side to it. Her role as the head of the Church of England, she was Supreme Governor, was something she gave a lot of thought to, according to those who knew her. In a speech made at the start of her Diamond Jubilee year in 2012, she described the Church of England as an umbrella under which other faiths could shelter.
Here at Lambeth Palace, we should remind ourselves of the significant position of the Church of England in our nation's life. The concept of our established church is occasionally misunderstood, and I believe commonly underappreciated. Its role is not to defend Anglicanism to the exclusion of other religions. Instead, the Church has a duty to protect the free practice of all faiths in this country. It certainly provides an identity and spiritual dimension for its own many adherents. But also, gently and assuredly, the Church of England has created an environment for other faith communities, and indeed people of no faith, to live freely.
My colleague Nick Robinson asked the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, if the same sentiments would be felt by the new king.
It is felt very deeply indeed by the new king and lived out by His Majesty during his enormously long time as Prince of Wales. And I think that speech of the Queen's at Lambeth in 2012 was utterly inspirational. It is one that we go back to very, very frequently. And I'm sure that Prince of Wales at the time agreed with what she said. His Majesty will carry that on. Carry it on in the sense that he will develop it as an idea. Yes, I remember hearing the Duke of Edinburgh on one occasion in an interview being asked a question about himself, and he said, it's not about me. And in one sense, what the Queen was saying at the time, in 2012, was, it's not about us, Anglicans. We're there for others. As she said, to be an umbrella for faith. And that is very much the attitude of His Majesty the King. And he will continue to encourage this sense of being there for everyone, of looking outwards, of welcoming all, and doing so without condition, the new king. He's paid tribute to her, warm tribute to her, but he's also paid tribute to what he suggests is her recognizing of a change in the way that private lives, public lives actually have been lived during the period she was monarch. He calls it a tidal wave of private interest and private reward. She fought against it, instinctively attached herself to the public good against that. Did you recognize that? No. I recognize that invariably and absolutely. It was in her own attitude of service that said, it's not about me, it's about what I have been called, and as she would have said, or thought what I have been called by God to do, as she recognized from her coronation onwards. But it was also a sense that the nation, and indeed the world and the Commonwealth, will hold together when there is that standing against private interests, where the common good is what matters. And she lived that out herself. His Majesty has lived it out in his life, and His Royal Highness Duke of Edinburgh lived it out in his. I think it's a constant in the way monarchy acts, because that is what they're called to, and that is what they recognise, and it, in both His Majesty and her late Majesty's lives, that comes out of their Christian faith.
That was Justin Webb talking to the head of the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. A press release from Buckingham Palace in the past few minutes has given us the following news. His Majesty the King will be proclaimed at the Accession Council at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, 10th of September, in the State Apartments of St James's Palace, London, it reads. In the last half hour, politicians here in the UK have been sitting in a special sitting to pay tribute to Queen Elizabeth. This is the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle. Or maybe not. Prime Minister Liz Truss also paid her respects, and the Leader of the Opposition has been speaking as well. You're listening to the BBC World Service
This is a special programme live from London to mark the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
With bbc.com/news, you get the latest news stories anytime you like. bbc.com/news offers you the most comprehensive news coverage in the world, and its stories are easy to search and navigate. Whether you're interested in science, health, technology, or business, the bbc.com/news website can offer it all. It also gives you the opportunity to listen live to our news output, or check the latest breaking news with our minute-by-minute news feed. If you want to take the news with you, we offer you downloadable podcasts to listen at your convenience, or archive programming so you can catch up on the programmes you've missed. Or you can access bbc.com/news on your mobile phone. bbc.com/news also lets you give feedback direct to our programme teams. All this content, coverage and opportunity makes the BBC the world leader in news coverage online.
Coming up on this programme in the next 30 minutes, we talk to more people representing key aspects of Her Majesty the Queen's life. We'll be live outside Buckingham Palace as crowds continue to gather. We'll talk to about her lifelong love of horses. We'll speak to the man who was the Queen's horse trainer for many years. We'll also be hearing from the Pakistani High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, and a former Prime Minister of New Zealand remembers the Queen as well. All to come after the news.
BBC Works with Jerry Smith. Bells have been ringing out at churches across the United Kingdom to honour Queen Elizabeth, as the country begins a period of mourning to mark the end of her 70-year reign. Parliament is holding a special session to pay tribute to the country's longest-serving monarch, who died on Thursday at the age of 96. The new King, Charles III, is now heading for London after leaving Balmoral Castle in Scotland. Later, the King will give his first televised address as head of state. Hundreds of mourners are gathering at royal residences across the United Kingdom in memory of Queen Elizabeth. Buckingham Palace says a period of royal mourning will be observed from now until 7 days after the Queen's funeral, the date of which will be confirmed later. Flags are flying at half-mast in many of the 14 other countries that Queen Elizabeth was head of state, including Canada, Australia, New Zealand and Jamaica. The Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea said the monarch will be remembered fondly as Mama Queen. Many upcoming sporting and musical events across Britain have been called off following the death of the Queen. The next round of fixtures in the Premier League and the English Football League have been postponed as a mark of respect. In other news, the governor of the Sumy region of Ukraine says a hospital has been destroyed by a Russian airstrike. Russia continues to deny that it targets civilians. The governor said there have been casualties. India and China have begun withdrawing their troops from a disputed border area more than 2 years after clashes at the frontier in the western Himalayas. And the Ethiopian government has dismissed a new report which has called for the UN Security Council to take action to prevent an escalation in the country's civil war and to protect civilians. BBC News.
Welcome back to a special programme here on the World Service marking the death of Queen Elizabeth. Now, Buckingham Palace in the centre of London has, of course, become a focal point for those mourning, as was traditional. A formal notice of the Queen's death was posted on the railings in front of the palace by royal footmen yesterday. The BBC's correspondent Michael Keogh joins us now live from outside the palace. The crowds have been gathering for 24 hours now. What's the mood there now, Michael?
It's moved from one of shock to a mood of remembrance, celebration and joy at the life of Queen Elizabeth II. As you pass through the mourners of various nationalities gathered outside the gates and the railings here at Buckingham Palace, the one thing they want to show is their pride in a monarch, but equally their pride in somebody who served until her final days. The one thing the crowd have got in common is that love of Queen Elizabeth II.
And presumably you're listening in on conversations there. The upset, you say, is people are moving on from. What's being said?
As you still walk through these crowds, people will tell you, I can't believe it's real. I can't believe this is happening. People
people still struggle to understand just the scale of the change we now go through. As you speak to people, tourists who are here in London, they say, I'm so lucky to be here because I get to mark this moment in history. And the one thing you're very aware of now is social media. As you walk through these crowds, you'll see many people taking photographs, trying to mark where they were when this happened, where they were when Queen Elizabeth II passed. And that's something that's very different as you go through this crowd. But you do hear many conversations, and you're very aware that people are saddened, but equally happy to be here, happy to pay their respects, and glad they get the chance to do so.
It's traditional, isn't it, for the palace to become a focal point of mourning in the immediate aftermath of a death like this?
It absolutely is. We saw scenes very similar in 1997 when Princess Diana passed, and the palace here became the focal point, even though the Queen wasn't in residence at the time. So the palace has often become the focal point. But what we understand is the Queen had several homes that she enjoyed spending her time in. So the sorrow, the mourning, has been spread out. We've seen flowers this morning laid at Balmoral. We've equally seen flowers laid down at Sandringham, Windsor, and outside Buckingham Palace here, where, since I've been gathered this morning, those bouquets have grown in number.
Many thanks. That's our correspondent, Michael Clark, outside Buckingham Palace. Let's talk now to Helen Clark, who was the Prime Minister of New Zealand from 1999 until 2008. I think she can join us. Helen Clark, welcome to the programme. Tell us about your recollections of the Queen.
Many recollections over many years as New Zealand Prime Minister, meeting the Queen when I hosted her in New Zealand in 2010, Commonwealth summits, visits to Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, special memory of the Queen and other members of the royal family coming to the dedication of the New Zealand Memorial on Hyde Park Corner. So I reflect from all those times. Many conversations were had. I found the Queen like a walking encyclopedia of people and places and events because her long life had prepared her to talk in depth about just about anything. And I just really am full of admiration and respect for what she did over those 70 years.
And you talked to her in depth. The Queen was famous for her skill at small talk, but there was much more than that too, wasn't there?
Absolutely. I guess what the public saw was perhaps the visit to an institution and the chatter on the side, but if you had the opportunity, as I did as a leader of Commonwealth country, to sit with her in private and discuss issues, you found her very well briefed, informed and interested in the world around her and what was happening.
Tell me about Republican feeling in your country, and is there something in the theory that it was held at bay while the Queen was still alive because she was such a respected figure?
I suppose there's a bit of that feeling, probably also in Australia. I recall a conversation with the previous Canadian Prime Minister who said to me, well, Helen, he said, if Australia moves on a republic, maybe New Zealand will and maybe Canada will think about it. That's a complex issue for all countries. In New Zealand, of course, the foundation of the modern state was the Treaty of Waitangi entered into by the representative of Queen Victoria with the indigenous people of New Zealand. And to unwind the constitutional monarchy, one has to think about what would be the place of that treaty and the framework for the future. So it's incredibly complicated, and I think there's not really an appetite to use much political capital on even launching a debate of that kind. In any case, that time is not now, and immediately after the Queen's death. But perhaps in the fullness of time, people will think, well, should we try to identify a form of head of state that's indigenous to New Zealand, but not yet.
And how key was the Queen in New Zealand to the way that Great Britain as a country was regarded?
Very positive, I think. She made 10 visits to New Zealand. She was the first British monarch to ever come to New Zealand. She came on her coronation tour in the end of 1953, early 54, and was here for a major disaster when the express train from Wellington to Auckland plunged into a river as its bridge had been taken out by a volcanic lahar that raced down the stream. And so the Queen was here as part of the grieving, and I think that really struck a
a notebook for Key Republic. And then she came back and back and back and back. Last time she was here, 2002, this is 20 years ago, I recall as Prime Minister asking the Queen in 2007 whether she and Prince Philip would visit again. And I recall her saying, Prime Minister, Philip and I are not getting any younger. And I had the feeling then that we'd probably seen the last visit. But nonetheless, the great affection was retained for her in New Zealand, and other members of the family kept up the connection.
Many thanks. Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand. Linda Yu is still with me in the studio. She's broadcaster, economist and author and chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society. And Linda, the Commonwealth is made up of 56 countries with very different priorities, and in some of those, Jamaica, Australia, there are countries that are part of the Commonwealth realm that talk about becoming republics has been ongoing for some time. How's that going to work, do you think, now that Charles is here?
Well, there is a trend of countries. So there's 14 realm countries in addition to the UK, who have the Queen as their head of state. But that number has been dropping. And what I think the trends are showing is the Commonwealth this year went from 54 countries to 56 countries. The number of realm countries has decreased now to 14, because last year Barbados are likely to become a republic. And I think that is that trend will continue with King Charles as well, because I think there are countries that feel the benefit of being in the Commonwealth because of some things that we discussed, having getting together to protect the environment, getting together in order to deliver global public good. But it's for every country to decide who they wish to have as their head of state. And as I say, this has been a trend before King Charles, and I suspect it'll be a trend going forward as well.
And Helen Clark wasn't going near there on behalf of New Zealand, but in fact overnight in Australia there have already been calls since the death of the Queen for Australia to become a republic. How much of a concern is that, do you think, for King Charles III?
Because this trend has been going on for some time, I do think that, in fact, I think King Charles at the time, he was actually there in Barbados when they became a republic. And so, sitting from the charity sector, I think the emphasis is on the friendships within the Commonwealth, but it's for individual countries to decide how they wish to have, who they wish to have.
It's a political decision, and of course the new Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, is a long-time supporter of the country becoming a republic.
Yeah, I think then he appointed a minister to look at this issue. I think when he took office a few months ago, so it is something.
He might be especially busy in the near future.
I think one of the good things about being in the charity sector is that we can focus on does the Commonwealth support people as it should? And my sense of how the royal family has treated it it's not dissimilar to what I described. I think it is largely up to the countries, and they hope that they will still be part of this network that can do good. But this is my word. That it's self-determination. Countries should have elections. They should decide how they do they want to have their state, and that's really up to the people of the country.
Many thanks, Linda Yu. Considering she was one of the most photographed people in the world, there were few truly unguarded moments of the Queen caught on camera, but some of those were the moments of unbridled celebration when her beloved horses won races. The sport of horse racing and the animals themselves were, of course, one of the Queen's lifelong passions. Here is the Queen talking about her love of horses for a 1974 documentary, The Queen's Horses: A Personal View.
My philosophy about racing is simple. I enjoy breeding a horse that is faster than other people. We're about to place races here in our park. And recently I've been trying to inject a bit more speed while keeping the same parameters all life.
Nicky Henderson is a British horse race trainer who worked with the Queen for many years.
Like the whole country, the whole nation, probably the world, I think. It's just a very, very, very sad thing. We've been very lucky to be involved with Her Majesty for a lot of years, and I suppose we actually nearly got to the point where we thought she was immortal. And in fairness, because obviously she's not, and you know that, and the day was always going to be a very, very difficult one, and I can only speak from our little small world of racing, which has lost its best friend, but the country has lost its best friend as well. We're only a little fog in her life, but it was her one real passion outside the world of, you know, that she carried out so fantastically well for those so many years. You know, racing has an enormous sector for what she did for it as a sort of patron, if you like.
Tell me about her passion for the sport and for horses. How did it show itself? Was it obvious when she was around horses?
Yes, because it was her one. In some ways, I think it was fitting that Balmoral was a place she adored, and very sad that she had, you know, she has died that this holiday, this time of the year was her happy time of the year. I think breeding them was one of her biggest passions. Only that the Royal Stud was at Sandringham, and she loved going there. And every time she was at Sandringham, she'd go to the stud, see the young horses, the future. She wasn't planning on going anywhere, to be honest with you. She was planning ahead. She thoroughly, I hope, enjoyed the calls and the conversations she regularly had on the horses and on all sorts of things. She was very, very understanding. She enjoyed the great moments, and she could be a wonderful loser as well. She understood. She understood horses really well. It was her one passion in life outside her day job, which was the hardest job in the world, to be honest with you, wasn't it?
And how do you think her legacy in the racing world will live on?
I have no idea. I was very fortunate in the way that actually I originally was training for the Queen Mother, who had the National Hunt horses. And when the Queen Mother died, the Queen took over the Queen Mother's horses, and probably didn't want it for me as well. And they were both, you know, the Queen Mother herself was just the same. It was bred into the family, if you like. The figurehead of racing was our Queen.
Everyone's looking for personal insights into the Queen's character at this stage. Are you willing to share anything with us, something that surprised you in your time with her, perhaps?
Nothing would surprise you with her, because I think the amazing thing was that talking to her was like talking to any other owner or person involved in racing. I think, you know, a lot of people ask, how do you communicate? And it's exactly as one does with absolutely anybody else. We had some very fun days together, and you know, it was a pleasure and an honour. And I don't think there were any great surprises, but one could just purely see the joy and feel the joy she had when things went right. With these wonderful pictures of her Royal Ascot, which is probably the only racing she actually... Royal Ascot week was put in the diary on the 1st of January, and that was that. But that would be the only time she'd actually go racing. There would be the odd day, but, you know, her diary was... and what she did was phenomenal. She couldn't just suddenly say, I think I'll go racing today. There's no such thing. She followed it so closely, and her knowledge of it well, that wasn't surprising, I must admit, but it was phenomenal.
Ecke Henderson, racehorse trainer who worked with the Queen for many years. Now, when the Queen attended the Commonwealth Heads of State meeting in India in 1983, a constant official companion was Brigadier K.P. Singh Deo, erstwhile Raja or King of Denkanal in eastern India. His wife, Rani Savitri Devi, talked to me shortly before we came on air.
I was introduced at the end of the whole meeting because my husband was minister accompanying Her Majesty for the whole trip to India. He accompanied her wherever she went, to the meetings, wherever she had to go. He had to be with her all the time.
This was for several days, was it? Where did she go?
They were in Delhi, they went to Hyderabad, they went to the National Defence Academy in Kharagpur, and they went to Goa, I think.
They must have got to know each other quite well.
Yes, I think so.
one incident he told me when they were in Hyderabad, they were about to visit an institute, an agricultural institute next week. So on the way there was a railway crossing. The car was stood and then a steam engine passed by. So she got out of the car very excited, left her hands and said, I'm seeing a steam engine after so many years. So very childlike at that moment.
Tell me more about what your husband said about the Queen.
She was always very concerned whether they were comfortable or not. No, because they were there all the time for all the functions. They called it master accompanying the Queen.
At the end of the visit, the Queen specifically asked to be introduced to you, is that right?
Yes, at the dinner, the last dinner, just before it ended, she asked him, I'd like to speak to your wife. So he called me, and then she says, I'm so sorry to have kept your husband away so long from the family. I think that was very gracious of her.
You met her again in London subsequently, didn't you?
We met her again in London when India was hosting the Commonwealth Games in 2013. And they had gone to get the Queen's baton relay. I met her on the stage and I greeted her and I said, it's my honor to meet Your Majesty once again. So she says, once again? And I said, yes, I met you during the 1983 Commonwealth Heads of Government. And then she had a very gracious smile.
What were your impressions of the Queen? Tell me any impressions that you can of meeting the Queen. We're gathering them today. It's really interesting to hear.
She was very gracious and she made everybody feel comfortable, whenever when she spoke to you. And then after she was Queen of England and we had read about her as a child and things like that. So it was a great honor to be meeting her in person.
How important do you think the impression that the Queen gave of the United Kingdom was? How key was she as a representative of the country?
She was the best you could have had. I think no one could have represented England better than her, the United Kingdom.
What will remain in your mind about her? What was your reaction when you heard the news of her death?
It was the end of an era, because those times were different and the transition she went through from the world on the world stage was always correct.
And I know your husband is with you. He's hard of hearing, so not talking directly to us now, but how does he mark her passing? What did he say when he heard that she died?
The same thing, that's an end of an era. It's very sad. She lived up to her first speech when she became queen, about she served the people and of England right till the last moment of her life, which she did. Her last act was appointing your new Prime Minister the day before she went. She tried to change, she was in service.
Former Indian royalty Rani Savitri Devi. Pakistan rejoined the Commonwealth of Nations in 1989 after a 17-year break. The High Commissioner of Pakistan to the United Kingdom has been giving us his reaction to the Queen's death. His name is Muazzam Khan.
First of all, if I may extend, our most sincere condolences on the passing of Her Majesty, the Queen. So it goes without saying that we were all very, very sorry about it.
How was she regarded in Pakistan?
As head of the state of the United Kingdom and as well as the head of Commonwealth family, the people of Pakistan have always held her in the highest esteem. She has visited Pakistan twice, first in 1961 and then in 1997. And we still cherish the fond memories of her visit. I think particularly as the head of Commonwealth, Her Majesty was able to transform the association, the Commonwealth, transformed into a robust family of free nations. So I think she would be greatly missed as the leader of Commonwealth, and of course the people of Pakistan also miss her greatly.
How do you think she came across to the people of Pakistan?
I mean, we have the fond memories of her visit. I mean, she was very affectionate, very loving. Her presence would make everybody comfortable around her. And of course, her dignified way of carrying her, I think, would always be remembered and make her, very distinguished.
To what extent do you think the cohesion of the Commonwealth depended on her as a person rather than her role?
I think her commitment to the Commonwealth, and particularly, when she became the Queen, at that time, if you see, the economic union, the European Economic Union, was taking more prominence and importance, and somehow the countries from Commonwealth, they thought that perhaps they were not really getting enough attention. So it was that juncture where she sort of, devoted herself to the Commonwealth, and she visited almost all the Commonwealth countries and attended all the Commonwealth conferences of head of state, except for, I think, the last one. So she was like personally involved in the well-being of the and the progress of Commonwealth countries.
It might be too early to answer this, but do you think the Commonwealth can survive as a robust organisation without her?
Well, I think while her passing represent an irreparable loss for the UK and Commonwealth, we are reassured by the fact that her most worthy heir, His Majesty King Charles III, would succeed her and will carry on her great legacy.
That was the High Commissioner of Pakistan to the UK, Muazzam Khan. I mentioned that in the last hour, politicians here in Britain have been sitting in a special session of the House of Commons. Here's a flavour of what's been said. The Speaker of the House, Lindsay Hoyle, remembered the Queen's impact on the House of Commons.
In this place, her reign saw 10 different speakers occupy the chair. During her reign, there were 18 general elections, and I'm sure the Prime Minister will remind of us how many of her predecessors she welcomed to, and always, I am sure, with quiet wisdom. As the longest-serving monarch this country has known, she would have been assured of a notable entry in our history books, even were it not for the magnificence in which she undertook the role as Queen, but for a magnificent service, and what a service that entailed.
The new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, also paid her respects.
On the death of her father, King George VI, Winston Churchill said the news had stilled the clatter and traffic of 20th century life in many lands. Now, 70 years later, in the tumult of the 21st century, life has paused again. Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, was one of the greatest leaders the world has ever known. She was the rock on which modern Britain was built.
And the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, had this to say.
Where everything is spinning, a nation requires a still point. When times are difficult, it requires comfort. And when direction is hard to find, it requires leadership. The loss of our Queen robs this country of its stillest point, its greatest comfort, at precisely a time we need those things most.
Keir Starmer in the House of Commons in the past hour. Just time before we end the programme, Linda, you, chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society, for you to add perhaps a personal recollection of the Queen.
I think I echo what many have said. She expresses huge warmth, great interest, and she puts you at ease. There's no fuss when you meet her. You might expect lots of, there's always pomp and circumstance, but there's no fuss, and she's genuinely interested. So we deliver 2 projects in her name. One was to get all 54 countries of the Commonwealth to sign up, and the other one is the Queen's Commonwealth Essay Competition.
She's so keenly interested that we would send her statistics on the entries. That, to me, is the mark of a great patron and a great supporter of charitable causes.
Linda Yu, thank you very much, and thanks for listening to this special programme marking the death of Queen Elizabeth II. You're with the BBC World Service live from London.
With bbc.com/news, you get the latest news stories anytime you like. Whether you're interested in science, health, technology, or business, the bbc.com/news website can offer it all. It also gives you the opportunity to listen live to our news output or check the latest breaking news with our minute-by-minute news feed. All this content, coverage, and opportunity makes the BBC the world's leader in news coverage online. bbc.com/news.